Hi, everybody. I hope you're well. And today we want to talk about the three things that you need to know to lose the weight and keep it off. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about the idea of why progress might feel slow for you, even when you're doing everything right. In fact, specifically when you're doing everything right. And so, one of the main reasons I want to do this is because sometimes when I chat with clients, with many of you that potentially are watching this who could already be a client of mine, or if you're just watching this and you are trying to go about your own journey, the main thing is that a lot of times in the process, even though we're doing everything right, we feel stuck. And for many of us, we start the process pretty strong, especially when you first sign up for a program, when you first start off a plan, but we tend to lose some momentum after a few weeks. And oftentimes, we also feel like we could be doing everything right. I'm following everything, but nothing is changing. I don't feel like my weight's going down. I don't really feel like too much of the changes in my waist, things like this. And for a lot of people, what happens is that it leads to this cycle of previous times you tried repeatedly to lose weight, try to get fit, and you try different methods, right? You go for a different type of diet, a different diet structure. You try to track calories, you try to do a carnivore diet, you try to do whatever diet, and you're just really tired of starting over. So if this is you, then potentially this could be a very helpful thing to understand, because once you understand this key concept here, it's going to really change the way that you assess and emotionally regulate and make the kind of progress that you want. So I want to talk about this first key concept, which is that perception creates reality. What you believe shapes what you do. And a lot of people don't think about this very deeply. They just kind of um, take it for granted, even almost go on it automatically. But the thing is, your perception of what your progress should look like, it actually affects your actions. And I don't blame you, because right now there's tons of media influence. Every day we are bombarded by a lot of different videos and social media stuff and regular TV media stuff, that there's this idea, right? We live in this whole world of 8-week transformations, 12-week transformations, all this kind of stuff. I do see a growing trend in Instagram or social media influencers trying to push maybe that concept of being a bit more patient, being more kind with yourself. But sometimes I feel it also drifts too much to the other end of the spectrum, where it ends up being too coddling. So we really want to find that middle ground of just being really honest with yourself, but also being self-compassionate. And if you expect very fast linear change, you're honestly just going to quit when it doesn't happen, and it's not going to happen, especially not right at the start. And that's why a lot of fad diets hook people in, because at the start they use a lot of unsustainable things and tactics to get very quick progress that's not sustainable or does not gel with the underlying fundamental way of doing things. But if you understand how change really works, which I'm going to go through one of the change models in a little bit, you'll know what is actually normal, what are the growing pains you're going through, and then you'll actually keep going, which is the key here. So let's talk about this emotional change of cycle of change model, and why it actually leads you to feeling stuck. So very briefly, if you look at this graph here, there are actually 5 stages to it. Okay, my apologies. I don't know why it says 4 main principles, but it's supposed to be 5 stages. Anyway, the main thing here is this: we always start off with the uninformed optimism side of the scale here before we start to gain some ground, and then we go into this next stage, which is called the informed pessimism side of things. Now I'll go into more detail in a later slide, but I just want to give you the brief breakdown of this. So the informed pessimism side of things, where you start to see hey, things are actually not what I expected, or there's more resistance in the process of change than I actually anticipated. And that ultimately leads people into this part we call the valley of despair. And most people, once they reach the valley of despair, is kind of where they drop off the program, or they drop off the plan that they have kind of come up with for themselves. But if you can make it through that, you go into the fourth stage, which is what we call hopeful realism. Okay. And then when you understand how things work, you understand the nature of your current reality, the efforts you've been putting in, how does it measure up against the kind of results that you want, it starts to go into this informed optimism, which is you start to see the possibility of what can be done, and you start to recognize your situation and say, hey, cool, I know what to expect, and I know as long as I stick with this thing in this way and focus on these things, I can get there. And that's where it leads ultimately to the success here. All right, so just a very brief run through of that. As I mentioned, the 5 stages here: uninformed optimism, informed pessimism, going down to the valley of despair, and then if you make it out of that, inform optimism, and then finally you get to the success and fulfillment. Most people give up at stage 3. Okay, that's the valley of despair for a lot of people. Now, just give me a second here. My thing just can pause for a moment. Okay, cool. So I mentioned I'm going to go through a bit more in depth here, right? The key thing about the 5 stages here is that if we understand where we are at in this part of the cycle, it becomes really easy to contextualize things for yourself and then spur yourself on to move to the next step or take the next correct action. So the first part here, if we look at it, is that when we talk about the uninformed optimism part of things, this is the breath of fresh air part. This is the part where we are so motivated, we start this new thing, right? Most people start very excited, very hopeful, they're ready for the change. Essentially, I think January is the best example of this, the new year, new me kind of thing. So you're very pumped up and you're like, oh, this is going to be the big change for me. This time it's going to work. But at this point, you don't exactly realize or truly fathom the changes and the challenges that are actually lying ahead of you. Then you go into the second stage here, which is the informed pessimism side of things. And that's where reality starts to set in after the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, couple of weeks. You realize that, maybe doing a little bit of meal prep is actually a bit more challenging. You realize that, hey, trying to get in more protein is a lot more difficult than I thought. You realize that your eating habits are just so out of whack that, you easily give in the moment you feel just any sort of desire to eat. You're just like, oh, I'm just going to go eat, right? You start to realize all these things are actually things that are happening this hard. It's actually hard, And the worst part is you realize that the results aren't instant because you keep watching the scale. So the initial buzz, the motivation you originally got starts to fade because of all these things, and the doubt starts to creep in, okay? And this doubt can be very poisonous if we don't handle it, if we don't metabolize it out of our system. And so this is where for most people it accumulates into this part, what we call the valley of despair, where the reality of the situation kind of hits you. For a lot of people, this is the breaking point. At this point of the emotional change cycle, this is where you are at your lowest. Because you're most likely going to be pretty exhausted from all your efforts being put in. You're going to be kind of discouraged. And you'll be thinking probably like, why should I even bother? And that's why most people will quit. But it's not because it's a weakness issue. It tends to really be because they did not really expect this part. Or for your case, if you look back and reflect on your own experiences, is it a case where you have not thought about, right, previously what the like this potential situation kind of occurring? And this is exactly, though, where the change is going to be forged. And this is where, if you can make it through, if you can actually help yourself push through this part of the journey, you actually start to realize the fruits of the labor and all the efforts that you've been putting in. So here is where, if you push through that, you go into the informed optimism stage, which is this hopeful realism and informed optimism stage. And something will shift, right? You start to adapt to the situation. You start to adapt your mindset and shift your mindset towards being more grounded, being more realistic in that sense, not in a negative way, but realistic in the sense of, cool, I know what's possible. I know what's based on my current efforts and how much more I can push or I'm willing to push. What is the kind of results that I can get? You're still working, but you start to observe the signs of progress, not just looking at the scale only, but you also look at other factors. You start to recognize all the things that you're doing and the direct ways it's impacting you. And so the motivation actually returns. But it's not from just pure hype like at the beginning, but it actually comes from your own personal results that you're seeing. And like I said, the results don't necessarily mean only the weight on the scale going down. You start to see, hey, maybe my pants are feeling a bit looser. Maybe I'm actually able to stick with this plan that I came up with, my meal set up and structure that I planned for the week. I'm actually sticking with it. And that's when, at this point, you actually start to really build new habits. You start to shift your identity. And that's the success and fulfillment part, this last stage up here. You build these new habits, you shift your identity into somebody that's actually doing the things that you want to achieve. Okay, and that's where it takes root. And you're no longer trying to be that person, but you eventually become that person. All right, but in order to get here, you actually have to survive the dip. So if you're feeling very stuck or discouraged, you're probably in that valley of despair at this moment, and knowing that actually kind of gives you a bit of power, because now you can choose to keep going, or you can just choose to give up and try something different. Okay, so like I mentioned here, being in this part is is really the hardest part. You are doing the right things and you're questioning yourself, hey, why isn't it working, right? There's two parts to this because you're putting the actual physical effort, but there's also emotional exhaustion. And emotional exhaustion comes from, again, the lack of clarity, right? It's the weight of the expectations you feel that you have not truly contextualized. That once I told you, hey, if you realize, hey, if I put in this amount of effort, I'm more likely to get this kind of results. Okay, I can match the two together. And if you don't do that, it will affect your focus. It will encourage you to keep fixating on the outcome. Oh, why is my weight not going down? Why is my weight not going down? It's just going to keep being this negative feedback loop. And that's usually what causes people to quit and find that new distracting, little tactic, right? The new slim fast or the new juice fast or whatever random, stuff your friend tells you, hey, I did this and I lost 5 kilos in 2 weeks or whatever, right? So don't fall for that, okay? Feeling stuck tends to make you question yourself. So you want to make sure you're questioning the right things and you can put it into perspective. Also, your past failures can always taint this and make the dip feel even heavier. So the thing I want to reassure you is that this happens in all areas of life. If you reflect on it, it's not just weight loss and fitness, right? If you reflect on other areas, your relationships with other people, business, in your parenting journey, for some of you to have kids, your own emotional healing from trying to process maybe childhood trauma, things like that, your general personal growth. Growing pains are very, very, very normal. And growth always comes with this level of resistance and discomfort. Okay, so that's why I want to remind you once again, remember our perception creates reality. The paradigm within our head colors the way we look at everything. And when we can shift that, we are able to then see things in a different light. So we talked about asking the right questions. We talked about, hey, how do we change things, right? Here's how you can move forward if you're feeling stuck right now. Like I said, ask the right questions. Generally, there are going to be 3 types of issues that everybody will face, okay? Pretty much these are 3 big umbrella categories, and you can easily put things mostly under generally 1 category. Sometimes they might overlap, but I'm going to break it down for you here. The first kind of issue is a skill issue. So a skill issue is actually honestly quite simple to fix because it's basically you just don't know how to do the thing. So we then only need to come up with a solution specific to that. So let's say you don't know how to meal prep, or you don't know how to train effectively. It's quite an easy fix. Make some technique tweaks, come up with a system of like what kind of meals do you feel okay with eating, and then reverse engineer that into a system. But there are 2 other aspects here that tend to be a little bit more challenging, which are the trait issues and the belief issues. So starting with the trait issue, you actually haven't developed a certain habit yet. So this is more like a thing that you are not able to consistently do. And so you need to remind yourself and put in effort that for this period of time, I need to keep being very conscious of doing this thing. So usually it's a consistency thing, or even just struggling with your own level of patience. So for example, stepping on the scale, getting emotional about the weight or something like that, that's a trait issue to a large degree. It's like just being able to regulate that feelings of saying that, okay, cool, I know this is just 1 weight reading in the grand scheme of all the weight readings. Let me not get affected by this. Let me focus and just record this down and say, let's move on the rest of my day, stick with my plan and carry on, right? So that's how you kind of deal with a trait issue. You have to focus on what is the thing I need to, what's the trait I need to focus on to develop, and how do I actually deal with developing that trait in those moments when it's being tested. Then the last one here is a belief issue, which in my opinion is the hardest one to change, because for a lot of us, we have very well-conditioned beliefs that we've had since young, and since that's colored by all our experiences growing up. So there are many beliefs that we will have regarding different things that can oftentimes make it very difficult for us to make changes that we want. We can even feel like, there's that internal conflict in us. And this is because a belief issue means that you don't believe that this thing is possible for you. So in other words, if you find yourself saying, I always fail, or I'm not meant to be fit, or I'm not this, I'm not that, or I'm always a XXX type of person. If that's in your internal narrative, you don't realize it yet, it's going to keep coloring the way you take actions. And so understanding which of these things would then allow you to figure out what you need to really focus on. Okay. And so the shift actually starts from here. Even if you've been doing everything right, you have to reflect on it and say, okay, cool. What are the things I've been doing really well, but what are the things I've not been really being able to keep up with? And that's where you can then say, hey, I need to get the right support for this. Because you can identify which issue it is. Is it a skill, trait, or belief issue? And then I can go and get the right support for it. Be it you go to your coach. For those of you that work with me, you know we try to solve it at all these levels, right? So you go to the coach, you go and get some support for this specific issue, right? Focus on this specific issue, unlock this thing, and then you get the right tools to get you moving on your way. The most important thing is, do you want to be honest with yourself, and you just want to be consistent? These two things will trump any level of perfectionism. All right. So quick summary here to finish wrap this up. Identify where you're at in the cycle. Most of you that are feeling very stuck are likely to be in the valley of despair. You have to be honest about what's holding you back. Have you actually been sticking with your plan? If not, why not? And then what's the cause of it? Is it a skill issue, trait issue, belief issue? And then decide what's the kind of support or shift you need to make next. Okay, so quick little engagement exercise here for those of you who are watching this. Which stage of the journey are you at right now? This change cycle are you at right now? Drop them in the comments below, or just send me a DM. Be more than happy to answer you and take this conversation further. All right, so that's it. I hope this helped you, and yeah, have a good one.